for the invitation, Mr. Guarnieri, and thank you, Mr. Hovind, for taking time out from your divinical studies to share your latest thoughts with us. I'm not here to defend the theory of evolution. I'm here to present a little bit of the evidence that supports the theory. It is supported by an overwhelming number of scientists, contrary to what Mr. Guarnieri has already asserted. Now, I'm going to talk on fossils and I'm going to talk on genetics. I want to talk on fossils for the first 15 minutes because I believe they're the key to the subject. If there were no fossils at all, I'm not sure we would be here today. I'm sure that it would have taken Darwin a good bit longer to figure out a theory of evolution. Imagine that creatures happened to just vaporize when they died, so they left no traces at all. That's just a property of life, and we're aware of it. We know that we don't expect fossils, but still there's an absence of evidence from the past that's disturbing. Well, that's not the case. Creatures don't vaporize when they die, and they often leave imprints which get covered up and are maintained over long periods of time. Now, you may not know or guess how many fossils have been discovered in the last 150, 200 years. But there are well over 100 billion fossils that have been discovered. There is one fossil field in which it's estimated there's 80 billion vertebrate fossils alone. There are tens of millions of fossils that have been cataloged, described, dug up, and deposited in museums and similar institutions around the world, and they've been studied. Whatever else you want to say about evolutionists, they haven't been lazy, they've been doing their work. Now, what does this huge fossil record tell us? It tells us several important things. First of all, it tells us that 99.9% of all species are extinct. That is, the fossil record largely consists of creatures that are not existing today, that have no counterpart today, but are different kinds of creatures, dinosaurs, for example. Okay, so for every one species today, there were 1,000 that went extinct. Furthermore, the fossil record, you know, I'm wondering if this thing is causing the feedback here. Oh, okay. There's a little bit of kind of feedback loop here. Anyway, if you look at the fossils, they're organized vertically, with, as we understand it, the top layers being more recently deposited than the deeper layers. And with some exceptions, of course, the general rule is that simpler, more congruent, and smaller species are located lower down in the fossil record. By congruent, I mean species that fall in between species that you would find today, for example. So you can go back, and I'll tell you about dating in a moment, to about 150 million years ago, and you find that mammals converge on a mammal-like reptile. If you take all land vertebrates, they converge to a fish that resembles a coelacanth, the lobe-finned fish. Now, the third thing that's worth mentioning is this same pattern is found the world over, again with exceptions, but you can line up strata in Australia, you can line up strata in Europe, you can line up strata in North America, and you find similar sets of creatures as you go down similar levels. Now, this pattern alone, with no other argumentation, suggests at once evolution through time, because you expect creatures to begin small, simple, and congruent. You expect higher strata to be more recently deposited. You expect creatures to become more complex over time, to increase in average size over time, and to diverge, which is exactly what the fossil record shows. Now, in addition, we have a completely independent system for timing these fossils. And this is dating the systems that's been developed by geologists based on chemistry and physics. It has to do with the radioactive decay of unstable isotopes. So, for example, carbon-14 is produced, we know, in the outer atmosphere. It is taken up by living creatures, but it decays. However, in the living creature, it reaches a steady state because it's continually taking in new carbon-14, and these steady states are well studied. When it dies, it no longer takes in any calcium-14. The calcium-14 in it just decays, and it decays, so far as we know, at a steady rate. Calcium-14 is only good back to about 50,000 years. It has a half-life of about 5,500 years. Now, at the other extreme, you have potassium argon, which has a half-life of about 1 billion years and is good for timing events from 100,000 years right on back to 1 billion, more than 1 billion. You have dozens of other chemical systems which have intermediate time scales over which they work well, and you have overlap among these systems, and you can look to see whether your dating systems give you congruent results. And they do indeed. It is not true if you use carbon-14 and another method that's also good for 50,000 years that you get divergent results. You get congruent results. So we have some confidence that we're able to date these strata, and we also show through the dating that the assumption that more higher up deposits are more recently deposited show less decay. The system even works for tree rings. There are trees that are 4,000 or 5,000 years old and whose age can be counted by rings, and by which you can check to see whether carbon-14, for example, is working. Now, at the time of Darwin, there was a sufficient fossil record, so the devout Christians who were also serious scientists had to imagine 20 separate creations followed by 19 obliterations, the most recent creation being the one we're living in order to make it consistent with a simple-minded reading of certain sections of the Bible. After a while, it becomes easier to imagine that God lets the world evolve than to put him or her to the work of continually creating and saying, oops, I got that slightly wrong, destroy the whole thing, start over. You'd have to have tens of thousands of separate creations and one less obliteration to fit the data according to this theory. Now along comes this character, and he says, hey, I can solve this. What about the flood? So he imagines that the flood miraculously killed off the earlier creatures. Apparently Noah violated instructions because he discriminated against dinosaurs and other creatures with nostrils, didn't allow them on the ark. And then in one marvelous swirl, somehow deposited these dead creatures in this highly organized pattern we see repeated the world over. Now, this violates expectation if you think about these dead creatures swirling around in this dreadful flood. You'd expect heavier creatures to fall deeper, for example. You don't. The heaviest mammals are right at the top. The dinosaurs are 150 million years old. They're not way down there at the bottom at, say, 500 million. So this view is absurd on its face in just trying to describe the actual evidence we have on the existence of fossils. But matters only get worse if you take this thing seriously, and that's what scientists do, and they do calculations. So they say, okay, you want to believe in this? How hard does it have to rain in 40 days and 40 nights to fill this water up to the point where it can then explain all the fossils? Well, it has to rain about 11 feet an hour. By comparison, 1 inch an hour is a heavy downfall. 1 inch an hour for 24 hours causes hills to give way. But you're talking about a rainfall that's 2 inches a minute. It's a rainfall you've never seen and can't even imagine. You'd walk out and splat. You'd be on the ground from that amount of water falling down. Matters get only worse. I didn't know before preparing for this debate, or whatever it is, that when it rains, heat is released. And someone sat down and done the calculation. Well, if you have this monstrous level of rain occurring, you have an enormous release of heat. And the calculation is that the resulting water is roughly between 2,000 and 6,000 degrees. A boiling cauldron of water produced by this vision of Noah's flood, killing off marine fish, freshwater fish, all kinds of vegetation beneath, and so on. And yet somehow, magically, 6,000 years ago, the water all managed to evaporate back down to our placid level of existence right now. Now, there are big absurdities and there are small ones. A small absurdity has to do with fossil footprints. I've seen hominid fossil footprints in Olduvai Gorge dated to 3 million years ago. Look human, but they're smaller. I've seen dinosaur footprints. I've seen bird footprints. How on earth are all these creatures able to leave footprints with this massive rain coming down, scouring whole hills down to nothing, but magically leaving fossil footprints? Then you've got other problems. The fossil records show that recent creatures in the fossil record just below the top are located where the current ones are. So you find marsupial fossils in Australia. Now, how do you assemble these creatures? Noah sends word, I need 2 lions from the Serengeti, male and female. I need 2 kangaroos from Australia. And don't exhaust yourself on the trip here, by the way, because you've got a hell of a trip back. You're going to be walking on mud hundreds of feet deep just to get back to where you belong. And matters are worse still. What about disease? Almost all human diseases have to live inside humans. There are some, like malaria, that have a mosquito intermediate host, but the rest go just human to human. So those 10 humans on Noah's Ark have got to have between them all the human diseases. Of course, if you've got a creative mind and unconstrained by reality, you can invent an ad hoc hypothesis for that. The diseases came from other creatures, but they left no remnants back in those other creatures. Our diseases do not resemble closely the diseases of other creatures, and the same argument that applies to us applies to every one of the other species on the Ark, too. In other words, when they call for 2 lions from the Serengeti, they say, and be sure one of you is bringing half of all lion diseases and the other's bringing the other half. Sick unto death they have to be to maintain biological diversity of diseases. So to summarize, we're being asked to replace a coherent, logical story based on millions of pieces of evidence, carefully analyzed and organized, and are offered instead a fanciful tale with a dreadful view of God's world, a cataclysmic world, a disaster of unimaginable proportions, which nevertheless had the magical power to produce a fossil record that imitated what you'd expect if evolution took place. I thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. It is an honor to be here, and I appreciate Dr. Trivers coming. It is extremely difficult to find professors willing to defend the evolution theory. I've been turned down over 3,000 times. This has just had a few debates. I'm just a simple high school science teacher that is sick and tired of the kids being lied to in their textbooks. So we'll cover all the points that he made as time permits here. If I forget what, bring it up during the question-answer session. Okay, let's see. Let me present the creation viewpoint clearly and succinctly. So people say, you guys don't have a model that you offer. Yes, we do. It's very simple. God created everything about 6,000 years ago in 6 literal 24-hour days. This is the only possible way that I can see to explain what are called symbiosis relationships, where thousands of animals require certain plants or certain plants require certain animals. For instance, in the termite's gut, there's a little critter that lives in there that cannot live outside the termite. The termite cannot live without that little critter in there. Which one evolved first? And how did it live for millions of years without the other one? That is only one of literally billions of examples that can be found in nature that are best explained by a simultaneous creation just in a few short days. Then I believe there was a worldwide flood about 4,400 years ago that completely destroyed this planet. I think that's the only logical way to explain the fossils. There's a phenomena that takes place during floods called a cavitation, and another one called liquefaction. We can get into a bit more of that.